Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we begin a new chapter called the Story of Mazdak. A man named Mazdak, who was eloquent and knowledgeable and possessed of great abilities, came to the court. Qobad listened to his wise words and made him the king's chief minister and treasurer. There was drought in food, and it had become scarce throughout the world for both the common people and the nobility. No clouds appeared in the sky, and throughout Iran no one saw either rain or snow. The great men of the land appeared at Qobad's door, demanding bread and water, and Mazdak said to them, "The king will be able to give you hope." Then he ran to the king and said, "Your Majesty, there is one question I wish to ask you, in hopes that you will give me an answer." Qobad replied, "Speak, refresh my mind with your words." Mazdak said, "Suppose there's someone who's been bitten by a poisonous snake and lies about to die. What do you say, my lord, should appear to a man who has the antidote, but who insists on hoarding it and will not give the bitten man the means to help him live?" The king replied, "The man who has the antidote is a murderer. He should be hanged at the gates as punishment for the dead man's blood, as one hangs an enemy who has been captured." Mazdak left the king's presence and returned to the crowd that was seeking relief. He said to them, "I have talked with the king about your demands. Wait until dawn tomorrow, and then I shall show you the path of justice." The crowd came back the next morning, weeping and with their faces gaunt with sorrow. When Mazdak saw them at the doorway, he hurried to the king and he said, "Your Majesty, victorious, eloquent, and wise, I asked you a question, and you answered, opening a door that has been closed to me. If you allow it, your counselor wishes to ask you one more thing." The king said, "Speak, don't hesitate. Let me profit from your conversation." Mazdak said, "Picture a man in chains. For want of bread he wastes away, and soon he will be dead. Now he's denied bread by a passerby who lets the miserable captive die. Should this man suffer punishment, or would you say that he did was just and good?" The king replied, "Destroy the wretch. By not acting, he has another man's blood on his hands." Mazdak kissed the ground before the king and left his presence. At the court gates he addressed the crowd. "Take the grain that has been hoarded and hidden away. Put it in men's disposal in the streets and throughout the town. Let each man take his share." The hungry mob ran to loot the granaries, and soon there wasn't a single grain left in either the cities or the king's warehouses. When they saw this, the overseers went to the king and said, "The king's granaries have been plundered, and Mazdak is responsible for this." Qobad summoned Mazdak and demanded that he account for the looting of the warehouses. Mazdak replied, "I told the suffering citizens what I'd heard from the king. I talked to the king of the world about the poisonous snake and about the man who had the antidote. The king told me that the man who had the antidote had committed a sin, and that if someone shed his blood, there would be nothing wrong in this. For a hungry man, bread is the antidote to his sufferings, one that he won't need when he's well fed again. If you are a just ruler, your Majesty, you won't hoard grain in your granaries. How many hungry men have died with empty bellies because of those granaries?" The king's heart was hurt by his words, and they stayed in his mind. He questioned Mazdak and listened to the answers and saw that Mazdak's heart and soul were full of such ideas. Mazdak talked of what the prophets and just religious leaders had said, but his arguments went beyond all boundaries. Crowds collected about him and were led astray by his talk. He said that those who had nothing were equal with the powerful, and that one man should not own more than another, since the rich were the weft and the poor the warp. Men should be equal in the world, and why should one man seek to have more than another? Women, houses, and possessions were to be distributed so that the poor would have as much as the rich. By the power of the pure faith, I proclaim equality," Mazdak said, "and what is noble will be distinguished from that what is base. Any man who follows any faith but this will be cursed by God." Young and old, the poor flocked to him. He confiscated wealth from this man and gave it to that, and the wise were deeply troubled by his talk. But Qobad rejoiced in his words and followed his teachings. Mazdak sat at his right hand, and the court had no notion of where the chief priest was. The poor and anyone who lived in the sweat of his brows were with him. His faith spread throughout the world, and no one dared to stand against him. The nobility faced ruin and gave what they had to the poor. One morning, Mazdak came from his house to the king and said, "A great number of my disciples and leaders of my faith have gathered at your door. Will you see them, or should they be sent away?" Qobad told his chamberlain to grant them audience, but Mazdak said, "This hall is too small to accommodate such a large number. It would be better if the king went out onto the plain." The king gave orders that his thrones be taken from the palace to the plain. 100,000 of Mazdak's followers were gathered there, and they were confidently before the king. Mazdak said to the king, "Your Majesty, you are above all wisdom, but you should know that your son Kesra is not of our faith, and who has the right to oppose us? He must promise in writing to abandon his evil ways. There are 5 things that lead us away from justice, and the wise cannot add another to them. These 5 are envy, the longing for vengeance, anger, desire, and the 5th, which becomes a man's master, greed. If you can conquer these 5 demons, the way to God lies open to you. It is these 5 that make women and wealth the ruin of the true faith throughout the world. If women and wealth are not to harm the true faith, they must be held in common. It is these 2 that generate envy, greed, and desire, and secretly they link up with anger and the longing for vengeance. Then demons corrupt the wise, and to prevent this, these 2 must be held in common. As he finished speaking, he seized Kesra's arm, and the king of Iran stared at him in astonishment. Angrily, Kesra pulled his arm away and indignantly turned his eyes from Mazdak. Qobad laughed and said, "Why are you so concerned about what Kesra believes?" Mazdak said, "He secretly denies the true faith. He is not of our religion." Qobad said to Kesra, "This is not the right way to deny the true faith." Kesra replied, "If you give me time, I can show you how false and dangerous all this is, and then the truth will be plain to you." Mazdak said to him, "How many days are you asking the king, whose splendor fills the world, to grant you?" Kesra replied, "Give me 5 months, and in the 6th I will answer the king." This was agreed to, and the king returned to his palace. Kesra sent messengers to find knowledgeable men to help him in his cause. One went to Ardashir, where the wise sage Hormazd lived. Another to Esteker, to some of Azad, who came with 30 of his companions. These venerable seekers after wisdom sat together and discussed all manner of things. When they made their report to Kesra, when he heard them out, Kesra went to Qobad and talked with him about Mazdak. "The time has come for me to learn which is the true religion." Kesra said, "If Mazdak is right, then Zoroaster's faith will disappear. I will accept his faith as true and choose in my soul as he has chosen. If the way of Ferdon of Esdras and Jesus and the Zen Avesta is mistaken, then Mazdak's words are to be believed, and no one in the world should be our guide but him. But if all he says is perverse, and he does not follow the way of God, hand him over to me, together with his followers, and I shall separate their skins and the marrow in their bones from their bodies." He swore this before Zalma, Khordad, Therion, Bandai, and Bezad, and then headed to his palace, determined to keep his oath. When the sun displayed its crown on the following morning, and the ground became like a sea of ivory, the king's son and the priests and sages he had summoned arrived at the king's palace, talking matters over as they came. Mazdak delighted Qobad's heart with his words, and then a Zoroastrian priest addressed Mazdak in front of the assembly and said, "You are a seeker after knowledge, but the new religion you have made is a pernicious one. If women and wealth are to be held in common, how will a son know his father, or a father his son? If men are to be equal in the world, social distinctions will be unclear. Who will want to be a commoner, and how will nobility be recognized? If a laboring slave and the king are the same, when a man dies, who is to inherit his goods? This talk of yours will ruin the world, and such an evil doctrine should not flourish in Iran. If everyone is a master, who is he to command? Everyone will have a treasurer, and who will be the treasurer? None of those who established religions have talked in this way. You have secretly put together a demonic faith. You are leading everyone to hell, and you don't see your evil acts for what they are. When Qobad heard the priest's words, he sprang up and shouted his approval. Kesra added his support, and Mazdak's Impinion's heart was filled with apprehension. The assembly rang with voices saying, Mazdak should not sit next to the king. He is destroying our religion. He has no place in this court. The king turned away from Mazdak's teachings in disgust, and his mind was filled with regret for what he had done. He handed Mazdak and his followers, who included 100,000 men of good standing, over to Kesra, and said, Do with these men as you will, and never mention Mazdak to me again. In Kesra's palace, there was a garden with a high wall around it. It was dug up from end to end, and Mazdak's followers were planted there, head down and their feet in the air, like trees. Kesra said to Mazdak, Go to my garden and see there trees of a kind no one has ever seen or heard of before. Mazdak went to the garden expecting to see fruit trees, but what he saw was there, he gave a cry of despair and fainted. Kesra had a tall gallows built. In the impious Mazdak was strung up alive and head down. He was killed with a shower of arrows. If you have any sense, you will not follow Mazdak's ways. The nobility were once more assured of their wealth, their womenfolk, children, and splendid gardens. For a while, Qobad was ashamed of what he had done and cursed Mazdak's memory. He distributed large amounts of wealth to the poor and gave gifts to the country's fire temples. The king was so pleased with Kesra for showing such wisdom that from then on he was always consulted with and listened to his advice. When he had ruled for 40 years, the fear of death entered his heart, and he wrote a document on silk, acting as his own scribe. He began with praise of God, with whom faith and ability come, whose commands are always fulfilled secretly or openly, whose sovereignty no one has fathomed, and whose followers are never cast down. He continued, Whoever sees Qobad's handwriting here should listen only to Kesra's advice. I have bestowed the glorious throne on Kesra, and may he flourish after my death. May God be pleased with my son, and may the hearts of his enemies be confounded. Never swerve from his commands. Rejoice and grow wealthy beneath his rule. He placed his golden seal on the letter and entrusted it to Ram Borzin. Qobad was in his 80th year, but he was not content to die. The splendor faded from his face and eyes. Death came to him, and the world felt his absence. His body was wrapped in brocade and prepared with roses, musk, camphor, and wine. They built an imperial tomb for him and placed a royal couch and crown there. They laid the king on the golden couch and closed the tomb forever. When the chief priest had ended the period of mourning, he made the king's letter public. It was read before the court, and the crown prince was sealed and seated on the throne amid the court's acclamations. Taking his place there, Kesra was hailed as the new king. Jewels were poured over his head, and he was given the name Nushan Ravan. So ends the reign of Qobad. Now I shall set before you the reign of Kesra, who ruled with justice and glory, and who became renowned for his righteousness and generosity. Nushan Ravan promised a just administration and set about making tax system more equitable. He toured his country's provinces and secured the borders against invasion. In particular, he built a wall between Iran and Central Asia to keep out attacks from that direction. Skirmishes across the western frontier with the Roman Empire, in which Kesra was mostly the victor, led to a treaty which included the provision that Kesra marry the Roman emperor's daughter. And here is where I end my tales for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends.